morning, good afternoon, good evening, yWhales, wherever in the world you are today. As always, time zones is our number one problem. But today is kind of a really interesting conversation that we're going to have. And I've got Rob from BurstIQ and I've got Ben Diggles from the Constellation Network. And this is really going to be, again, a little bit of not talking too much about their individual companies, which is what we do, but more of a larger brainstorm around the differences between a public and kind of a private / specialty use blockchain. And I think I encounter this all the time when doing consulting or talking through, kind of projects with people where they immediately raise their hand. And the first thing is they're like, I have a project and I need to have my own chain. And 99% of the time, my answer is no, you don't need your own chain. But let's talk through kind of why you think you need your own chain, and let's kind of evaluate the issues there. Generally, what I hear from them is, Ethereum doesn't work for them because of the cost or because some reason. And then I say, well, there's like 50 other chains that are relatively mature at this point, and they've never heard of them. And so I think that's, for someone an entrepreneur that wants to enter the space, this is a really good opportunity to take two of, I think, some of the most mature chains that are out there that are designed specifically for commercial use. And I say that very, very deeply, that commercial industrial use blockchains that are actually in effect today. So I really want to kind of go over and make sure that you guys understand who our guests are, why they're here, and really a little bit behind them. So Rob, if you wouldn't mind, give a quick background on yourself, and then a little bit of kind of the thesis behind BurstIQ and what you guys are doing today.
Perfect. Thanks, Jay. So thanks for having me today, by the way. I'm Rob Lubeck. I'm the Chief Growth Officer at BurstIQ. Come from this very kind of diverse background, everything from cybersecurity to real estate development, to educational toys, and now ended up in the blockchain for healthcare world. So I think I found my eventual calling. It just took me a few steps to get there. But BurstIQ, little quick history of the company. We were founded in 2015. We've had an operational service since 2017. And in essence, we have created a global data exchange network, and we purpose-built it from the ground up. We do use a lot of blockchain methodology, hence the reason why I'm on the call today. But we really focused on the unique requirements for healthcare and life sciences related data. As one of the most heavily regulated and compliance-driven data sources, we are storing personal identifying information, personal health information, which is very restrictive how it gets used and accessed. And so we actually built our chain from the ground up. One of the biggest differences that we did is we actually designed it purposely to store data on the chain and the blocks themselves. And it really kind of gives us a unique aspect of how we can define data ownership, both single and multi-party owners, how the sharing is done at a very granular level, and also kind of create a kind of a unique mechanism for where as we are trying to combine more diverse data sets around the country and world to create more holistic or really longitudinal views of patient and health data, with the ultimate goal of really putting more control over the healthcare data to the patient level, to allow them to eventually monetize their data, share their data, and we really control how their data is used both for research and profit.
Love that. And just if you had to give a number one reason why somebody that wanted to develop in the space or develop on your chain would not use, I'm not going to pick on multiple chains here, would not use Ethereum or Solana. Why is BurstIQ kind of that one reason a little bit better?
Well, one of them is really the privacy. We need to support the whole HIPAA kind of compliance, and it gets really hard to do that on those kind of traditional blockchain methodologies. And that's why we really had to go to a private permission chain to abide by all the regulations around that, and just to be able to control that data in a much more private manner.
Love it. Benjamin, over to you. Same question, a little bit of background, and then a little bit of behind Constellation Network. Why does it exist?
Yeah, absolutely. Just to give some love to BurstIQ, I agree with that methodology. Meet the legacy where they're at, versus trying to get the legacy to speed up and meet, these Web3 ecosystems where they're at, which, as we all know, is like, going to Mordor and back. So happy to be here with you, Rob. Thanks for having me, Jay. Benjamin Diggles, I'm one of the co-founders of Constellation Network. I drive all of our BD efforts, including federal, enterprise, academia, and so forth. We've been in business for since 2017, so we're almost at our 5-year anniversary, which we always say keep them alive till they're 5, and so we're almost there, which is very exciting. For those that don't know what Constellation Network is, we are a very robust ecosystem. We are our own blockchain network built on a directed acyclic graph, or a graph approach, much similar to IOTA and others in the DAG space. We're open source, and we really wanted to be an outfit that encouraged not only individuals but business to build for the future when we think about bridging Web 2 to Web 3. So that's why I mentioned the legacy. My background largely is in enterprise. I come from companies like Webtrends and Oracle. I've been in big data and enterprise for over 20 years. And so I got into this space thinking that, blockchain was just everybody was the star of their own movie, and wanted to see if it was actually a real thing. And so I've been very hell-bent on the adoption of these types of technologies. And Constellation is very unique because, and I think we're a hand to fit the glove with a BurstIQ, so I think we should talk a little bit deeper after this call, is we're really focused around the processing and validating of third-party data. That's the utility of our network. We're very data-focused. And being a graph-based technology, we're able to hit really infinite transactions, which I can explain at some point if somebody wanted to hear that piece. But the point being is that we built a feeless network that's very scalable, very decentralized, and it's for the people. But with that, we also work with enterprise. And so our biggest, claim to fame on the enterprise side is we've been kind of the name for federal government and DoD for the last 3 years. And I can share some of those details because I think it's apropos to this conversation. But we have our own consensus algorithm called proof of reputable observation, which is essentially machine learning at the edge, allowing us to take in as much good and bad data as possible. And the big difference between us and, say, an Ethereum is that they use smart contracting technology, and we use microservices and state channels. And those are terms that a lot of folks don't really hear very often. But a state channel essentially allows us to process and validate third-party data from multiple blockchains or any data source. Doesn't matter if it's a weather sensor or whatever. And so companies are coming to us to build applications on top of our core network that will be predicated on the validation and incentivization of data. So that's why I feel like BurstIQ and Constellation are two companies in two peas in a pod, if you will. So happy to be here, Jay. Thanks for having us.
Love it. And this is the first two time these gentlemen have ever met, and I think probably bringing these companies together because traditionally, like I said, a lot of the blockchains, we're all very inclusive, but we, kind of get off into our own worlds and our own theses and work projects. And so I'm really excited to kind of have this conversation today. And by the way, anyone that's listening that really wants to go more in depth with either BurstIQ or Constellation, we do have individual podcasts that we've done with both Mr. Diggles and Rob over here. So those links will be down in the comments below. Well, let's go ahead and start off with, I think the really big one is when I have people that come in for consulting or say, hey, I'd like to start a project. Traditionally, the conversation is going to start with one of two chains. It's going to start with either Ethereum or lately I'm hearing a lot more people talk about Solana, and you'll get a few dots and avalanches kind of mixed in there. But these are relatively large chains, very large projects that are under rapid development. And the thing that I would, kind of like to say and get a little bit of your feedback, and I'll start with you, Ben, is, Solana is maybe 24 months old, Avalanche Dot, maybe a few months older than that. What does it take? Both of you guys have been around since about 2017-ish, 2015, 2017. What does it take to kind of get those cycles of maturity to get to that year 5 that you guys are at right now?
Well, cycles of maturity can be an interesting way to frame it, because we are in the Wild West right now, right? And everybody is kind of blazing a new trail as each day comes upon us. And that makes it wildly exciting, but also just like I feel like everybody has sweaty palms every 24 hours in Web3 because it's like, what's going to happen next? And I think we all got even sweatier palms after the Luna crash, right? Like now everybody's looking over their shoulder wondering, like, what's the next thing to fall? And unfortunately, I feel like ideally it would be led by regulation and compliance, right? And that's what would really cause a company to be mature. And I guess that's the only reason I point that out is that Constellation is a very regulated, US-based company that has been playing by the rules as much as possible. That said, and this is not profound by any stretch, is, the marketing and momentum very traditional that we see in Web 2 or any other industry is key to really hitting that maturity. There's some amazing projects out there that nobody even knows existed that have better technology than Solana, right? But the problem is nobody knows they exist. And so as we've seen, is having some of those strategic key investors early on is what gets people on the radar. And that's when you start to see people glom onto a vision of possibility. That said, when you start looking at some of these ecosystems like Solana that have bursted up to $80 billion in a market cap, as they say, more money, more problems, right? There's stuff that comes with that. You start to get a lot more scrutinized. So I believe that just being able to have that wherewithal to be consistent and persevere through a lot of that is what really tests a lot of these companies. And I mean, EOS, look at those guys. We don't hear their name anymore. And that was like the big one, right? It was like everybody thought, okay, it's EOS. Everybody, and they even had that delegate, interesting kind of governance model. I hate to laugh, but it was just at the time where I'm like, oh no, so you just gave this group $4 billion in such a net new industry, and we don't hear about them anymore. So you can kind of compare and contrast good practices from a Solana and EOS and really tell that story.
Yeah. The question I have for you is you've probably gone through the evolutionary cycles of Constellation, meaning the major changes, hey, we were totally wrong on this. Let's redo this thing. And it seems like when I talk to you or kind of, interact with Constellation, you guys are in the refinement mode. You're fixing things, you're evolving things, but you're not, tearing things down and going through what Solana is going through right now, which is major upgrades, major changes, kind of almost every 30 days.
Yeah, we talked about this on our last call, which was it's a bet. I call it the enterprise bet of first to market innovation versus technical debt. And I've seen companies that have had to refactor something like a Redis versus Postgres database model, completely migrating their system, and they're out of business because the effort was too big, right? And we're seeing that now where folks are so, gold rush mindset that it's like, oh, we're just going to launch all of this stuff on, Solana or an Ethereum smart contract. And, it's kind of the shoot first, ask questions later. But it makes sense when there's like literally billions of dollars just kind of floating around for those that are bold enough to grab it. That said, it comes at a cost and there's going to be a pound of flesh. And Constellation has always stayed true to our vision of building a very stable and consistent model, even though it's taken us much longer than some of these others. We're very proud of what we've built, right? We can't really have a lot of these holes and stuff when we're working with, say, the Department of Defense, and it keeps us honest. But at the same time, unfortunately, we don't move as quickly as some of these, community members and folks that are at the throes want us to. So that's the pullback.
Yeah. And, both of you guys are in highly regulated, or work with highly regulated industries and highly regulated clients. Rob, jumping over to you and what you've accomplished with BurstIQ, healthcare is, I hear it all the time, and people believe that, hey, I've got this machine's data should go on the blockchain. I'm gonna write this over onto Ethereum, and we're gonna hash it, and it'll be super private, and they'll all be keys. But that doesn't really work in practice, because unless you know who wrote that data, there's no searchability. You can't mix that in with everything else, because at some point, whether it's hashed or perfectly protected, regulators don't look kindly on like, well, theoretically, no one should ever be able to get to that. Correct?
Correct. Yeah, data security and the healthcare world is getting so much visibility right now with all the attacks and ransomware. I've heard a number, I don't know if it's true, but they claim that healthcare data is 7 times more valuable than financial data right now
Wow.
Yeah. And so it's a really scary endeavor. Every day we're reading about a new breach and a new hack, and part of the problem is, so healthcare, number one, has to be broken down into a lot of different kind of sub verticals. But if you look at where all these hacks are being done, and mostly in the provider networks and the hospitals and the doctors' offices, and part of the problem is the legacy EMRs or EHR systems that they're still fighting this kind of open system. And so, that's kind of one of the issues that we're seeing today. And to go back to your question earlier, Jay, a mature company is a bit of an oxymoron, I think, in the whole blockchain world. And I completely agree with Ben. It is the Wild West. And one of the things that we've tried to kind of really focus on is stay as focused as possible. It's so easy to try to branch out from where we are living and breathing. We have all these other industries coming to us, and we're happy to talk to them. But I think part of our success is we've stayed hyper-focused on both the healthcare and life sciences world, which gives us kind of a unique perspective and allows us to really focus all of our changes and features to accommodate their needs both today and the future. We're actually moving to a graph database in the next rev, Ben. So it's interesting to hear that as well. And I mean, that's the correlates, the tangential connections play such an important role in healthcare that's been one of our, I feel like although we stay hyper-focused, that's one of our kind of bigger shifts. Now, granted, on the customer perspective, I don't think they're just going to see all these cool new features without kind of understanding what it actually took to shift our entire network to that. But that's kind of where I feel like it's been important for us for the longevity of being now in business for whatever 7 years plus. And that's what's kind of kept us here today.
Perfect. And I'm going to go ahead and throw out the next comment statement, kind of topic, which is centralization versus decentralization. And, I'm going to guess that both of you guys have a core team, still most likely of founders involved and a core dev team that are working on this day to day. That's backed by most likely a global community of a decentralized, governance token or a variety of ways that you guys make sure to engage your community, and also kind of involved, outside devs and prospective clients. Am I correct on both ends there for you guys?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess maybe I can touch on that as, it's the topic of decentralization in a company is in Web3 is never done. Right. And I think that's kind of the ethos is that you're never done. You're never fully decentralized. There's always going to be a gotcha. There's always going to be something. So it's like, how do you get as decentralized as possible, knowing that there's always going to be something that somebody's going to scrutinize that may not be considered decentralized. To us, it's extremely important. That's always, I want to be a footnote in a wiki article someday and nobody knows who I am. I want this thing to be completely owned by the community, by the people, and we're making as many steps as possible. We're continually redoing and inviting new people into our governance board. It's currently going over a big overhaul now that our new mainnet and public network is out there. And this also is extremely important when we talk about the SEC, right? Like, as we've seen, the SEC actually does take decentralization very serious because it's one of the things that we all tout. And if they find out that you're not doing that, then you get in hot water. It's not very profound. And so I see that as, as sad as it sounds, kind of the guiding light is the SEC. You want to first make sure that you keep them very happy. And then there's the community because everybody can see the ledger. They can see who's holding what tokens and what not. And anything that gets transferred even within our ecosystem, sure enough, we have admins and governance folks that perk up and they're like, hey, we need to have an answer for this because we're not sure what's going on here so that we're all unified. That said, it's tough, right? Like, that's what I love. Everybody's all kind of geeked out over DAOs. I know that, yWhales is really focused on the DAO model. But I'm sure as you've seen, Jay, decentralized business workflow has its own drawbacks, right? I call it like Lord of the Flies, getting people together, coming up with their own rules outside of the mothership. And everybody has a kind of a balanced vote, whoever passes the conch shell. So anyway, I sort of cringe when folks are just hexed on decentralization, but through the lens of SEC as well as token holders and network stability and fidelity, I completely understand.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. The one thing I hear from so many founders, so many VCs, and it's consistent, is the rush to decentralization is the cause of failure for a large number of projects in and around Web3. And I think that one of those things that's for the first time, in history, tech has the ability to be decentralized. And it's a really cool concept from a DAO perspective, which yWhales is very involved in. You guys are as well. Or just from a development standpoint of which you can have an entire dev team that's out there. So decentralized is kind of one of those words that can be used a variety of different ways. But I really do believe that the work that both of you guys are doing is being done by a centralized team, which is correct. That's what you want. You guys have a very clear vision. You're in a highly regulated asset classes that you guys are messing with and not messing with, engaging with. And so Rob, when you're kind of dealing with that same deal, the regulation, like you have to have valid answers and you have to have a valid roadmap for where you're going, correct?
Yeah, and we don't. I mean, the Burst IQ, decentralization in healthcare does not really work today, and so I mean, we're kind of a unique model there. So we still under HIPAA, we still need to manage and control our own nodes for our entire network, and no matter where they're located. So in essence, we have some decentralization features, but I would actually consider us more of a centralized network today. Now that will change over time as we're able to deploy that. But you're right. I mean, it's because we are so heavily regulated. Nothing can become public. I mean, it's a very different model than Ben, and we do very different things, which makes sense. And that's why ours is going to look and act very differently than most of the other kind of blockchain methodologies out there, because of the strict privacy regulations that we have to follow to the T and cannot vary in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. And this is the point I'd really like to bring up for anyone listening about the biggest difference between Web 2 and Web 3 is in Web 2, the case of decentralization isn't even a real option. If one day that, Rob and Ben say, you know what, our highest goal right now is decentralization. These chains are mature. They are functioning. Everything's fine. And as Ben said, hey, I just want to be a footnote. Now we want to go to true decentralization. It's a relatively straightforward process to make that happen. If suddenly Amazon S3 decided that they were going to go full decentralization and they want to put this out there, it's not even something that was possible. They couldn't do it if they tried. It goes entirely against a Web 2 business model, the SaaS business model, to have this. And so the point that I'd like to make, and I'd love for you guys, feel free to comment on this, we can always decentralize, but you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. And the work that you guys are doing right now as a dev team, and you're 5 to 7 years into this right now, you've got another decade plus of growth. I mean, we haven't even hit, a couple, 500 million users. We haven't even got there. Let's hit 1 billion users on a chain, any chain, and then worry about decentralizing and being able to back things off. Because until then, it's voting on directions and everything else is really not that core focus, especially when the Department of Defense, I'm sure, has some very core integrations that they need to have happen. And so if those can't happen, then they're just not going to use it, correct?
Yeah, and before I touch on that, I just want to touch on what Rob was mentioning around healthcare data and how we're different as companies. I once heard, and who knows if this is even real, Rob, you would know if this is just some hearsay, but that every American has something like 300 plus copies of their medical records. Every time you go in somewhere, it gets copied. And the only people that don't have them are the actual patients, right? I don't have my medical records, but it's sitting all these places. The
Correct.
point being is, while a protocol or a core ecosystem like a Constellation or Solana wants to be as decentralized as possible, that's not in the cards for every application that's built on top of it, right? And largely because, as we mentioned before he came on the call, it's going to be easier to meet legacy where they're at than try to get legacy to come into this full-on Web3 decentralized world. And even then, that's not necessarily the best, situation. And touching on the DoD, they were very curious about this. This is a topic that I've talked at length with many people, because I don't know if you guys saw that the Pentagon put out a report in June of this year talking about how the security threats of blockchains, right? I don't know if you saw this. I can send out the article so we can include it in the show because it's very interesting. And it caused a huge stir in the federal space. And seeing that I'm sort of the face of blockchain for federal, I had to meet with 1 million people and kind of talk them off the ledge to explain to them, no, this was a study on public blockchains. This was a study on Ethereum and rollups and all these different, patches and stuff and how they're laden with security holes and whatnot. But they didn't really take into account, permissioned blockchains or private blockchains, which there's a little nuance between those two words, but for, all intents and purposes, we'll just call them permissioned. And that's what's beautiful about this is, the government can grab Constellation's network. I delivered a package this last week. They now have the keys, the documentation to everything, and they can deploy a network and we would have no idea it exists. No idea. They can deploy as many as they want. And they can do it in a way that it's feeless. They don't have to have a token. They just have to apply as many nodes required for the validation and the orchestration of the security. And bam, they're off to the races. And that's very interesting to them, that they have full ownership. But it also breaks the procurement process because they're used to buying SaaS-based solutions, licensed solutions, things where they pay a vendor for a software license agreement or an SLA in which they, utilize it and everybody's happy. This is tough because it's a discipline in which they orchestrate their infrastructure, saying, okay, instead of having a central server, and I always call it the dragon, you're going to need a flock of birds, and they all live in the same environment. So instead of paying $1,000 for the a month for the dragon, you're now paying, $10 for 100 of these flock of birds, right? And so it's a lot of education on this, and they now understand the importance of these permission blockchain and how it works, and that they don't need to put mission command and missile launch data on a public ledger that's being validated by somebody's basement, node in Russia. So I can certainly talk on details of this, but it is the hot button within the federal government. And the last thing I'll say is that, what drives me nuts is that no folks are really looking at the maturity model, the 2.5 and the Web 2 to 3, that it's like, oh, we're going to go from crawl to run. And it's like, no. And we're seeing this like with what Rob had mentioned is that, yes, they're going to find ways to be more decentralized and more secure as they warm up. But there's a lot of work to bringing people into just step one. So if you come at them with like, hey, we're going to step 10, it's a moot point. You're done.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm just going to go ahead and pivot that right over to Rob because he referenced a number of things you guys are doing as well. What's your feelings on kind of, this rush to decentralization and everything?
Yeah, I mean, it's once again, I think people reacting to this market somewhat not rationally, and the hot thing then becomes the hot thing for everybody. And I don't think a lot of these companies are kind of thinking through the future ramifications of some of these decisions. And you're right. I love the analogy. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. And I think we're going to see a lot of that today. I think there's going to be a lot of companies that are going to this road because they think it's the hot thing to do, and it's not the right thing to do today. It might be in the future when things change or evolve, or a portion of what we're seeing today, or some aspects of what we're seeing today. But I think a lot of people are going to make a lot of mistakes. And granted, there'll be a lot of learning. There's a big learning curve as we still kind of go through maturity of a lot of these different things. And both the companies producing the blockchains and the companies utilizing the blockchain solutions, I think there's been learning curves on both of those significantly. The one thing that changes our world, we actually deal with governance not on a chain. I mean, we have some governance on a chain level, but the real governance is defined independently by each of our different clients. So it could be organizational compliance and governance that are all can be very different depending on which client we're dealing with or which country they're located in. And that also just makes jumping into this decentralization in our world a management nightmare. To be honest, if it even physically possible at sometimes.
Yeah, and one of the things I love from our interview with BurstIQ that I found just absolutely fascinating is because you guys do control your nodes, and there's an absolute reason why you have to, like for a variety of compliance and regulatory reasons. But there are some healthcare providers that are regulated to say that your data cannot leave this country, this state. There's still regional, like remember where we came from, like punch cards and like a centralized deposit. And now for all of us that say we believe in blockchain, we believe in a distributed ledger, we have to take the time and steps to get these industries there. And so one of the things I felt was so cool about what you guys have done is because you control your nodes, and everything's there, they can see what, everyone can see what you're doing, but you can take a specific client and say, hey, you can't leave the Australia. Like this data has to be here because it's a regulatory thing. And if we can't do that, then they're just going to stay with their traditional SaaS provider and Web 2 and ignore this entire revolution. And I think that what you're doing is providing a stopgap to get them comfortable. Did I describe that correctly?
No, that was exactly right. I mean, yeah, Australia was a perfect example. That's one of the countries that requires that. There's a lot of countries in the Middle East that have that same kind of requirement. And yes, we can deploy those nodes. Suffice the laws of that country, but all the nodes are still connected, so the network still looks like it's seamless in one. And the other thing where we're seeing, the United States, of course, we've got GDPR, which was great, it's straightforward, but now we have all these different privacy laws that are popping up on a statewide level. And in essence, there might even be, unless there becomes a federal mandate, there could even be state requirements that are going to affect the privacy of the data within that as well, which I feel could be a Pandora's box. I don't know where this is all going to come out to. I mean, hopefully we just have one set of rules, or you hope you abide by the most stringent rules that covers everybody else. But there's some weird intricacies coming in these different states around data privacy. So that's the other thing that's got a big kind of question mark and potential red flag of where this is going to head.
Now I'm by trade, I'm a kind of a CIO, big data guy, and so I'm going to go to the professional here, Diggles, on big data. What we're kind of talking about, where there's specialized chains interacting with other chains that are we have to provide this level of data access, this level of data security, this level of redundancy. This is just standard questions that any big company would ask for, and what we're kind of describing here with these public versus private or permissioned changes you're talking about is there's going to be lots of chains. There's no one chain to rule them all. And the idea that there could be a company out there that wants to use both BurstIQ, Constellation Network, and Ethereum is 100% going to be happening in the future for different reasons. But Ben, I'd love to hear your kind of synopsis on what a multi-chain universe looks like.
Yeah, I think going back to us using microservices as a way and state channels to validate and process third-party data and legacy data, we're very proud to say we were the world's first L0 protocol. And I usually explain that as like, say Ethereum's ecosystem is a city and they've got their roads and, their different trains and planes and all that stuff. We're like the subway system underneath that connects the different ecosystems, naturally having our own, but our city is based on data, right? Instead of like a Frankfurt that's finance or so forth, right? And so with that, that's one of the big reasons we won the DoD contract is we're super open. Like I'll partner with anybody. We want to work with anybody. We feel the pie is big enough for interoperability of all these different solutions. You talking about Constellation, BurstIQ, and Ethereum. You can use proof of authority on top of BurstIQ and then use us for the processing and validated of bulk data. Everybody can have a piece in this, right? Of course, how you orchestrate that is up for discussion. But in theory, it all is there, right? And you may have heard the term, the blockchain trilemma. That's kind of become like this term. It was like kind of back in the mid 2000s, the splinter net. I don't know, these dorky digital transformation terms, but the trilemma is really around networks that can handle security, scalability, and speed, like the three S's. And we're very proud that we're solving a lot of that or have solved some of that. And we're going to start to see blockchain be, in my opinion, largely a commodity, which means that this is why I love smart contracts or the idea of code is law. Is like, all right, well, once we do look at some of these compliance measures or regulations that may be states or country specific, you can build compliance into a state channel or a smart contract to enforce how that data is being consumed and validated and ingested, right? So to me, I think that's the future, is that a lot of this technology is going to start to play the cops or the lawyers and in a very effective way. And to me, that's the most exciting thing, is the automation of what can happen through data validation, data sharing, and data security. But when we talk about a topic of like, toothpaste leaving the tube, I call like this last 25 years and probably the next 10 as the great data leak. This is a time that in the future of the history books, years down the road, we'll look back and be like, holy cow, the internet came out and people had no idea the value of their digital footprint. And all of these behemoths took massive advantage of it. And there's nothing these folks could do. And now, like Rob was saying, with these regulations that are hitting at the state level, you start to see companies freak out because it's like, we're going to go out of business because this is how our business is completely predicated. And that's going to be an ugly time, right? We don't want to get into a totalitarian world where so much data is being protected. So hopefully we can find a happy medium. But it's sad to me that we've seen so much abuse and corruption around the usage of data. It's baffling that people still use Facebook to this day, even though there's documentaries out there saying, hey, they're screwing you. And it's like, oh, that's cool. I'm going to share this on Instagram. It's like, that's still Facebook. And then TikTok is another one that is enough to make you lose your mind. So I think that what Rob is doing and what we're seeing in healthcare is going to be the true unsung heroes of what matters to people around data. If you tell them, hey, your digital footprint on your web, people are like, I don't care about privacy. did you know you can make an additional $1,500 a month on your medical data because right now it's getting used by third parties that you don't even know about? People will be like, wait a minute, that's my money, right? And it's going to take some of those discipline shifts for us to see people wake up to what's happening. And so you've got a big task ahead of you, Rob, but I guess I've got mine on my side too.
I think we both do. And to continue from there, thanks, Ben. So you talked about multiple chains and interacting. I 100% agree with you. That's going to be the future. We're already seeing a lot of use cases where, hey, we don't want to leave Ethereum, and can we use some of your kind of sharing features on top of that, and we can absolutely run on top of the as a layer 2 on top of other layer 1 protocols. The other thing is, BurstIQ, we're not a crypto company, and so we are already seeing use cases. And go back to your point, Ben, where patients can start monetizing their data. We're going to need to connect to some other kind of payment rail, whether it's ETH or some others, to facilitate that payment. Now, we can still kind of keep that data private and control the smart contracts on our platform, but then send it to a payment platform to facilitate the actual compensation down to that patient level. So, as we say as a company, rising tide rises all ships. There's a lot of room for a lot of blockchains and a lot of different features. And so, yes, 100%. We need to have as much interoperability with these chains as possible to enable our future.
I love that. So, and this is where, Ben, I'm going to push on you a little bit more just because I'm sure you have the stats more in your head than I do. But we've seen this massive data migration before. When suddenly, Dropbox and Google Drive existed, and they said, hey, you can have two gigabytes up in the cloud, and that turned into terabytes, and is kind of grown to quite larger. We saw, I remember in the days of like going and opening that drawer full of all these hard drives as my personal stuff and migrating all this data up to the cloud. And it's lived there since. And we also saw the same thing with companies. And I have it today in the building that I own and that I'm in right now. In the basement is a data recovery center for a relatively large bank. It's physically here, and they haven't moved it, and they're preparing to make that migration again here in 2022, up filing into the cloud. So it takes a lot of time for some of these industries to get comfortable with it. They don't own the hardware, they don't own that raw metal that the drives are running onto. But as soon as they kind of get the team in place and they have the use case of offloading it, they never come back. I'm never going to download all of my data onto a drive and say this is my primary storage. I may back it up that way, but primarily this is how I'm going to use it going forward. Ben, what does it even look like? Again, we're not mature enough with the technology, but what does that migration even look like? It's decades of time.
Well, I hope not, but at the same time, based off of the past, and that's what I love about this movement, Web3, is that we actually have playbooks we can look at in the last 30 years that inform some of the human characteristics and behaviors of how we're going to deal with what I consider the biggest kind of esoteric point of decentralization is the desire for control, right? Like you go into the DoD, you go into a bank and say, hey, we're going to take your control over this thing and we're going to put it into the cloud. They're like, ooh, that makes me really nervous. Hey, guess what? Now we're going to decentralize it across all these different clouds. They're like, no, wait a minute. No, how quickly can I get to it? And so that ownership or that desire to feel control is a discipline shift that is going to take time, right? That's not something we could just brute force with technology and it's going to change the disciplines in human, but to your point, like about how we've seen some of this before, the move to decentralization and Web3, I kin it very similar to the move to the cloud, right? That's, if you want to look at like a case study of how this is going to go, that's a pretty good blueprint. I know it's not, exact, but we saw it with early internet, right? Everybody remembers intranets, right? Remember saying that term and people are like, what the hell is an intranet? Are you saying it right? And it's like, well, no, it's like your own internet, but it's inside your business and you control who it logs on and how. That's essentially a permission blockchain in many ways, but you configure it in a way where you don't have the same sort of modalities of control. And so it's not fully decentralized, but it's much more resilient and effective for what it's supposed to do than the current centralized approach. And when we think about like you're talking about the hard drives and us moving data around and people getting like, wow, getting these notifications that I'm running out of space for Dropbox all the time. I would say one of the great indicators in human shifts with that at the consumer level was when the iPhone came out. I can't remember if it was iPhone 10 or 11, and they offered one that was like 500 megs or something, like a gig, so very small amount, because they assumed everything you're doing is on the cloud. Like, and they're like, hey, how do we cut the cost and get people away from these things? Much like let's kill the CD-ROM in most of these computers, because we're now in the digital download world. And so, you know, it's not, I'm not going to name names of large hosting providers, but you can probably paint a picture, is that it's not profound, but also a great business model that they, with bulk data, have no problem taking it in. But in order for you to access it, it costs money. And that can be very costly and so forth. And so with Constellation, and this isn't just unique to us, but we don't store any of the data on the blockchain. That's much different than us than BurstIQ. And it makes complete sense with BurstIQ considering their model. With us, it doesn't make sense. We just validate it, we hash it, and we don't really care where it's stored. But that is a security threat. And so what we're seeing is a huge uptick. Like our DoD contract, we had to go in with a data provider called Kinemie. They do what is called encrypted sharding, which, just to give a quick dirty, is like you throw down a piece of mirror, it shards into a bunch of pieces, and let's say that's a file of data. Each of those pieces are representative of the whole, much like kind of BitTorrent type stuff. And then when you need to reconcile it, you can, and they're all versioned and all that sort of stuff. But same thing with like the graph, and all of us moving kind of into a more robust IPFS model, that data storage is a whole other ball of wax in a decentralized way beyond just the validation and governance of the communication protocols on blockchain. So, yeah, I think it's very fascinating. But the intranet is the one thing I wanted to add to this conversation that helps people's brains be like, oh, we've gone through this before in a certain version, and now this is a much bigger one that's being governed by a stronger decentralized network, but it's still an intranet.
Yeah, and Rob, that's one of your big, one of the big advantages of BurstIQ is it's a lot cheaper to utilize your chain to store this data and everything else than if you were using, a chain plus IPFS plus, plus add-on. You've kind of said, here's everything that's needed in this industry, and you've had some amazing success already.
Yeah, I mean, pricing has been a big thing a big kind of differentiator for BurstIQ, and everybody has the unique model. And one of the things that I think is tough for some of our clients is an unpredictable forecast financial model. And I mean, running on Ethereum network, for example, number one, how do you predict the number of transactions? And then how do you predict the ETH price based on the number of transactions and really budget accordingly? And so we wanted to make our model very differently, and not transaction based, but actual kind of, we call it a life graph, which is a digital DNA of a person, place, or thing, the person being a patient, the thing being an IoT device. And so we just charge per month per life graph. And so take a patient, for example, they might have 10 or 100 data sources feeding in to build that longitudinal life graph, but we're still going to charge for just that one life graph. So it just makes it really easy for our clients to understand our model and know how to project as they grow their base.
Yeah. And I mean, this is solving some big problems. I mean, I had to get an MRI for my neck the other day, and they literally handed me a CD. What am I supposed to do with this? And they go, well, you have to go take this around to the different surgeons that are going to work on you. And I said, okay, but why can't you, where does this exist? And already I've lost it. Like it's gone and it's, but it exists in both these doctors' office. So if I wanted to get it back, it's just, the data is decentralized to the point it's useless at this point. And so we're actually talking about centralizing onto these chains. And I think we're also talking about some differences right now between Constellation, which is a level 0, and BurstIQ, which is a level 1. And they're both solving two different problems, but none of this could be done on Ethereum or Solana or any of these other big chains, because I've yet to ever meet the CIO, CFO, CEO that goes, you know what I'd like for us to do with our data? I want to make it more expensive. I want to make it slower, and I want to make it more complicated for us to hire devs to be able to work with it. And so what you have is that either it can be something that I think Diggles, you said earlier, either it can be an easy transition for them to start using blockchain technology, or they're just going to continue to upgrade their Oracle servers and hide off in the corner, because no one's ever going to approve, a 10,000% increase in their data writing cost, not even reading cost, just writing the data to the cloud is going to cost that much more.
Yeah, no, I think it's a fun time to be alive if you're into this nerdy tech, because as we were saying at the beginning, wild wild west, and I like that, right? And so I just think that like a lot of this stuff is going to kind of go away. What I say as far as like we got to get more regulators, and I like spending time with lawyers as much as I need a hole in the head, but at the same time, they're showing up right now. Like they're really leaning into this. I've never seen lawyers be so excited about a new movement in all my life. And so getting them involved in the building of these solutions as early as possible is the ace in the hole. And that's what we tell every project. It's not a bolt-on, you absolutely have to figure out a way to build this stuff into your solution. But when I think about these ecosystems, they all have a place. Like I can look at Apple Maps, look at Apple Search. Have you ever fat fingered something in the App Store and it's just like, we can't find it, and all you did was add an extra S, and it's like you didn't have any recommendations, right? Because their search is so terrible, and they refuse to give the business over to the Google index, and that makes sense. Same with their maps; it's terrible, but they're really good at other things, and that's what I'd see. Like Ethereum is going to continue to attract, and Solana is going to continue to attract outfits that are going to build based off the best of their capabilities, which they're vast in, right? That said, they're not a fit for anything. When we're talking about data, they're sort of left out in the rain, because the cost of validating a microtransaction is often more than the value of the actual transaction itself. And that's the sweet spot, this new porous environment of being able to move micro investments, microservices, and microtransactions around in a meaningful way. So with Constellation, we're attracting companies that are really looking for, like, you'll hear it from Jenny Co. They can't build what they're trying to do on another chain today. Who knows if there's something coming out? Again, happy for competition, but they're like, well, whether we like you guys or not, you guys have the solution. And the good news is they do like us, but to actually make this come to fruition. And we also see other projects that are like, well, we looked at Constellation, but we thought Solana was a better fit for where we're at as a company. So that's how I see the world.
Yeah, and Rob, over on your side, you guys are, there's no real alternative. I mean, to what you guys are doing. They can absolutely write their own contracts. They can hash their own data. They can do all sorts of things. We can replicate a lot of this over on Constellation or a variety of other sources. But the conversation today that we're having is like, there are lots of valid reasons for specialty chains and for there to be lots of specialty chains. And at some point, we're going to see companies that are operating with, exactly as Diggle said, kind of hidden blockchains that they're just running privately. There's no public access. But the point is that we need that move to the blockchain ledger is what's most important right now here in that point in time, because I'm sure you have the same sales problem that a lot of people have, which is like, people hear blockchain and they just hear all in their head. They hear Bitcoin, they hear volatility, they hear chaos, and that's really the furthest thing from the data services that you guys provide.
Yeah, I totally agree. You bring up a really good point. I mean, the beginning of my BurstIQ journey, we wouldn't even use the word blockchain in the conversation, because they couldn't delineate between crypto and the back end kind of data support infrastructure, and we would lose them immediately. It's like, oh, I don't want to touch you with a 10-foot pole. There's still some of that. I mean, I think we're getting to a place where people understand the difference between what we do and the crypto side of things. But there's still so many misperceptions in the world. I mean, even if you take Web3, I think if you'd ask 10 different people, you'd probably get at least 9 or 10 different answers of what they think Web3 is even today. And you even got the confusion between Web 3.0 and 3, and people don't understand the intricacies between those two. But in the end, to your point, yeah, there's going to be general chains, there's going to be specialty chains, but the more data we can get on any one of those chains, the better off we're going to be, because I think people and companies and down to an individual personal level are going to start seeing the true benefits of what we're able to do today, what Web3 is going to offer, down to that kind of personal ownership and personal monetization and personal control. But once again, it's like, yeah, every bit of data that goes on some form of chain, I think is going to be beneficial to our future, and just one step forward to getting out of the Wild West.
Where it's going to take a minute. It's going to take a minute to get there.
It is going to take a minute.
So bringing this into close, with just kind of a couple questions. I'm going to pose the same question to you guys in a little different ways. Rob, when someone is evaluating, do I need my own chain or not? What's kind of a couple ways that people should think, because, you guys have spent 7 years, building a chain. There's a lot of chains out there today that you can do, and, but you can go spin up another chain. What would be kind of your advice to someone that's, before they go, start that process and burn a couple $1 million, launching a new chain, for why just to kind of look at how to adapt to some of the existing ones out there?
Yeah, and you're right. Building a chain right now, you're right. I mean, is a huge endeavor. It's extremely costly. It's very time consuming, and I think I'll use the term maturity, though, even though I use that lightly. It's still, we've got some pretty good maturity for some amazing solutions on blockchain today. I mean, track and trace your supply chain was non-crypto side was a great first use case that's now gaining more and more momentum. And now we're seeing so many different applications across the universe around what we can do with blockchain, especially on the business world. And I think, we have learned so much. I mean, as Constellation and us, we've been around enough where we have learned and evolved and pivoted based on knowledge and expertise and working with real clients, that we just have a much more, just a better solution than someone trying to build it from the scratch today. I mean, evolving is all about learning and making mistakes. And we've done that now for 5 or 7 years, where someone kind of going to build it is going to start all over in that process. And they're going to make probably some of the same mistakes, additional mistakes. And we like to tell clients, it's like, focus on what you do best, focus on that front end application or the solution that you're trying to build around data, and let us handle the back end. And that's kind of our pitch. It's like, a lot of the times, enterprise clients have the expertise, but we deal with startups as well that have kind of no expertise to do that. And just, it's makes pragmatic sense for them to kind of bifurcate this and let an expert do on the stuff that they don't need to focus on, and let them really focus on the front end and selling their solution.
I love that response and that advice as well. Ben, going right over to you, kind of same question, but I'm going to phrase it a little bit differently, and only because you brought up Terra Luna earlier, which was a dedicated chain. They did have EVM, so the Terra Luna, model existed, but they were very finite, and it was entirely, structured around this Luna, Terra Luna stablecoin thing. And so suddenly all that work that people put onto these, onto their dApps and onto that Luna chain, because one dApp failed, it took everything down. And so I'm going to go ahead and bet that you've put in some time and energy and resources, that there's no one thing that could take Constellation down. But what is kind of in that same aspect, how do you guys look at data security and overall chain stability, which would go well beyond anyone trying to build their own chain?
Yeah, again, using kind of examples from the past, which is a luxury we have right now, is if somebody was to approach you and say, I want to build my own database, we would all say, don't do that, right? Like, why would you build your own database when there's tried and true solutions out there that are both free and really expensive for you to dabble with? I think that, the Luna stuff was tragic. I personally pulled out before because it was one of those too good to be true, and I didn't understand it enough, and nobody had answers for me of why it was too good to be true. So when it happened, I thought, okay, I wasn't crazy, which I felt good about. But I'm not trying to diminish Constellation or blockchain in general, but it's really just an immutable database in many ways. And why would you build your own if there's solutions out there to help get you to that, through that discovery process, to make that decision before just coming out of the gate? And I believe from the commodity perspective that we're going to see in a world that you're going to absorb data or communications. And it's almost like the early 2000s where people would transact higher if they saw a silly little lock at the end of the e-commerce funnel, right? Oh, it's secure. I saw the lock, right? But I do believe there is going to be a check mark at some point to say, hey, this is on a blockchain. And if it doesn't have that check mark, you just don't dabble with it because it could be corrupt or it could be duplicated or so forth. So first off, learn from others, not profound, but then look at like what Amazon put out, 3 years ago, the blockchain as a service solution. And the reason they did this within their own ecosystem is like, if blockchain becomes a thing, at least they're going to be within our data management tools and utilizing this service within our walled garden. But that's a way to just like, hey, I'm just going to drag this down and I'm going to start messing around with it. I mean, I can spin up a database right now in a matter of minutes. And we want to get to a place where people can spin up a blockchain and start kicking the tires within a matter of minutes. You look at, Simba Chain, they have this great a drag and drop canvas where you can start messing with smart contracts, whether they're Ethereum or Stellar. I mean, it's really cool stuff out there. So I just think it's hubris, and I've dealt with it my entire life working with engineers and developers. They're like, no, I can do better. And it's like, you're betting the farm on ego. So let's start there. But at the same time, there is an ability to build your own solution. I've seen small independent chains that are very robust and very cool for specific applications in which the vendor doesn't talk about blockchain at all. So, and the last thing I'll say is with, the Web3, people not knowing what it is, I'm very thrilled that it's starting to now bleed into the commercial space. It's starting to become a vernacular. You see it on billboards. People are talking about it. Though I do think the individual's like, why the hell should I care? Why would I get involved in this? But like, I do a lot of newsletters because it allows me to passively shop without shopping, right? And so Scotch and Soda sends me a newsletter the other day. It's like, we're Web3. And I was like, holy cow, like, wait a minute. This fashion company from Amsterdam is now Web3. And they had a little thing that said, what is Web3? And I clicked on it and they had a whole FAQ section trying to explain a very esoteric topic. And I thought, oh, wow, it's happening. So this is good for all of us, especially when we're trying to sell into the enterprise and the legacy that cannot decouple blockchain from Bitcoin, right?
And it's very true. And I think that that's one of the biggest things that we just, as an industry and an asset class, retail is fabulous. I love that we have so many entrepreneurs that are joining the space. We speak to them every single week, but we got to have the big institutions get behind this. We have to get rid of the archaic API networks that exist and are very restrictive today. I mean, we're not going to dive too much into kind of owning your own data online here today, but that's exactly what blockchain does, and that's what BurstIQ does for health records and medical data. And Constellation, you guys are just doing for data in general to allow it to be moved around these blockchains in a secure and regulated format if need be. If you don't care about the regulation, great. That makes it that much easier to move the data. But really, I think that this has kind of been an amazing conversation around. There's plenty of uses for Ethereum, native Ethereum. There's tons of uses for every other public blockchain of which anyone can log into. Anyone can write any data that you want, and then you become the repository of where people need to search to go find that data. Coming back over to what we've really been talking about today is very, very clear use cases, and I think BurstIQ, I love picking on you a little bit, Rob, because it's like, my data is here. And if someone says, I need my healthcare data, it should be something that's very easy to find. It's a repository that, regardless of what hospital, what part of the world you went to, it should be something that everyone can at least say, it should be somewhere on this chain because this is the chain for that data. It can be a variety of other places as long as it links back. And I think that's the biggest point, is that data should be free. It should be free flowing, but it should be searchable and findable and not locked behind, these walled gardens of which the user has no ability to ever find it. So my last thing, any closing thoughts based on the conversation? I'll start with you, Ben.
No, I mean, yeah, I'll say something. Heck, but I mean, no, in the sense that I don't have anything bubbling up other than just my pure support for this, right? Like, I think what Rob had mentioned early on is just that, like, there's just, and I know we're beating a dead horse, so much education required, so much, demystification of what this stuff is. And I'm so looking forward for us to get past that, of people like, okay, I know what the internet is. I know what a database is. I know what cloud storage is. I know what blockchain is. Now, how do we focus on the configuration of this stuff, right? How do we really, and that's where I think a lot of the monies we're going to see coming into this is in the solutions integrator or the solution, system integrator folks that are all kind of like foaming at the mouth and sitting on the throws, waiting to see who's going to be the first to really create playbooks that they can take forth and sell these types of solutions into environments they already have their teeth into. So that's what I'm excited for. And we always say, it's a marathon, not a race. We have to keep just putting one foot in front of the other, and it will play out. But also, as Hyperledger Fabric, the Brian gentleman said, blockchain is a team sport. So I'm more than happy to collaborate with anyone that yWhales wants to bring into our world, and we'll do the same. And it's really great to be connected with you, Rob.
Love it. Love it.
Thanks, Ben. You too. And yeah, I mean, I don't have much to add to that. I love being on this ride. I wouldn't want to be any other place right now. And Jay, I've also just loved to be a part of the yWhales. It's getting me exposure to and insights to a lot of things that I typically wouldn't get through my normal daily occurrence. But no, I mean, it is a marathon. I'm excited every day to kind of see what's next. And where this is going to go, and just happy to be here and happy to be invited to this podcast too.
No, you guys are awesome, and I really appreciate this. And this is exactly one of the things that we want to continue doing. Education has to be a lifelong journey, especially in blockchain. Someone could have, been an absolute expert, known everything there is, but if they haven't been in the space for the last 6 to 12 months, everything's archaic. It changes so fast. And so I appreciate you guys coming on today, really sharing not just the experiences of your own chains that you guys operate, but really how they integrate with the rest of big data as they're starting to come on board. Real quick, last point, Ben, where can people find you if they want to interact with you or Constellation?
Yeah, ConstellationNetwork.io, and then we also have our staking portal, which is Lattice, LATTICE.is. Lattice is the domain. We just launched 2 new branded websites, which we're really excited about. So check them out, and then you can Google my name if you want to get a hold of me.
Fabulous. And Rob?
Yeah, so it's BurstIQ.com, BURSTIQ.com. My directly, rob.lubeck@BurstIQ.com as well.
Love it, guys. Thanks so much. Don't go anywhere. And yWhales, this has been really a good in-depth discussion on why, specialty chains exist, where kind of data is going, and really kind of how to think about the overall ecosystem as it grows overall. So thank you guys so much, and we'll catch you guys next time.